South Africa represents one of humanity's most compelling historical narratives, a nation where archaeological evidence suggests our earliest ancestors first walked where ancient kingdoms accumulated extraordinary wealth, and where the modern world witnessed one of its most remarkable peaceful transitions to democracy. This comprehensive examination explores how a country at Africa's southern tip became both a symbol of systemic oppression and the embodiment of reconciliation. Contemporary DNA research and archaeological findings position South Africa as potentially central to human evolution. 6.5 million years ago, the region that would become modern South Africa hosted some of humanity's earliest ancestors, the Australopithecines. These proto-human settlements were not random occurrences, but strategic choices based on the area as unique geographical advantages and abundant natural resources. Archaeological evidence indicates that approximately 125,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans established sophisticated settlements throughout the region. The Blombos Cave archaeological site, located along the southern Cape Coast, has yielded some of the earliest evidence of symbolic behavior and artistic expression in human history, including ochre engravings dating back 73,000 years. These discoveries suggest that South Africa was not merely a location of human survival, but a crucible of cognitive and cultural development. The Khoikhoi and San peoples, collectively known as the Khoisan, represent the region's earliest known inhabitants. The San, often referred to as Bushmen, developed sophisticated hunter-gatherer societies with complex spiritual beliefs, astronomical knowledge, and sustainable resource management practices. Their rock art, found throughout South Africa, constitutes one of the world's richest collections of prehistoric artistic expression, with some paintings dating back over 27,000 years. Various tribal groups gradually established territorial boundaries across the region, each contributing distinct cultural practices, linguistic traditions, and technological innovations that would shape South Africa's multicultural foundation. The Bantu-speaking peoples began migrating southward around 2,000 years ago, bringing ironworking technology, agricultural practices, and cattle herding that would fundamentally transform the region's economic and social structures. Between 980 and 1300 AD, the Mapungubwe kingdom emerged as South Africa's first major civilization and one of medieval Africa's most sophisticated states. Strategically positioned near the confluence of the Limpopo and Shash rivers, this kingdom established extensive trade networks reaching China and India, evidenced by discoveries of Chinese porcelain, Indian glass beads, and Persian glazed pottery in archaeological excavations. The kingdom's political structure demonstrated remarkable sophistication, with a clearly defined class system indicated by residential patterns on Mapungubwe Hill. The elite resided on the hilltop, separated from commoners in the valley below, a social stratification reinforced by differential access to imported goods and burial practices. The famous golden rhinoceros and other gold artifacts discovered at the site demonstrate not only the kingdom's wealth, but also advanced metallurgical skills and artistic traditions. Archaeological evidence reveals a society with complex agricultural systems, including terraced farming and sophisticated water management techniques. The kingdom's prosperity derived from gold mining operations in the surrounding region and control of trade routes connecting the interior with the coastal ports of present-day Mozambique. This commercial network facilitated the exchange of gold, ivory, and other African products for exotic goods from Asia and the Middle East. The kingdom's decline in the 14th century resulted from multiple factors. Climatic shifts brought recurring droughts that affected agricultural productivity, changes in regional trade patterns reduced commercial revenues, and political instability weakened centralized authority. The population gradually dispersed, with some groups migrating north to establish new settlements that would eventually contribute to the Zimbabwe kingdom's development. Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias first rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, initially seeking maritime routes to Asia rather than territorial conquest. However, this contact opened pathways for more systematic European involvement in the region. The Portuguese established several trading posts along the coast, but showed limited interest in permanent settlement, viewing the Cape primarily as a navigational landmark on their lucrative Asian trade routes. The transformative moment arrived on April 6, 1652, when the Dutch East India Company established a permanent settlement at the Cape of Good Hope under the leadership of Jan van Riebeeck. Originally conceived as a supply station for Asian trade routes, this outpost rapidly evolved into something far more extensive. The Dutch settlers, later known as Boers or Afrikaners, expanded inland systematically, establishing agricultural operations that would fundamentally alter the region's demographic and economic landscape. The colony's labor needs were met through the importation of enslaved populations from diverse regions: Indonesia, India, East Africa, Mauritius, and Madagascar. This forced migration created South Africa's complex racial hierarchy and contributed to the emergence of the colored population, people of mixed European, African, and Asian ancestry. The Dutch also implemented policies that dispossessed indigenous Khoikhoi and San peoples of their traditional lands, forcing them into labor relationships or pushing them into increasingly marginal territories. By the 18th century, these settlements had developed into profitable agricultural enterprises, specializing in wheat, wine, and livestock production. The Dutch colonial society established a system of racial classification and legal discrimination that would profoundly influence South Africa's future development. The Dutch Reformed Church provided ideological justification for these practices, creating a cultural framework that would persist long after Dutch political control ended. The Napoleonic Wars fundamentally altered South Africa's colonial trajectory. British forces defeated the Dutch East India Company in 1795, assuming control of the Cape Colony. This transition represented more than administrative change. It initiated comprehensive cultural and political transformation. British administrators implemented policies that alienated Dutch settlers. English replaced Dutch as the official language. British currency was mandated, and new legal frameworks were established. Most controversially, British approaches to slavery and indigenous rights conflicted sharply with existing practices. Between 1835 and 1846, approximately 15,000 Boers undertook the Great Trek, migrating inland to escape British authority. This mass movement resulted in the establishment of two independent republics, the South African Republic, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. These developments suggested South Africa might evolve as a collection of separate European-controlled territories, but subsequent discoveries would reshape this trajectory entirely. Diamond discoveries in 1867, followed by the identification of the world's largest gold deposits on the Witwatersrand in 1886, fundamentally transformed South Africa's global significance. These discoveries attracted international fortune seekers and established towns like Kimberley and Johannesburg virtually overnight. The British Empire, recognizing the strategic and economic value of these mineral wealth, became increasingly determined to control these resources. However, the primary gold deposits lay within independent Boer republics, rather than British-controlled territory, creating inevitable tensions that would culminate in devastating conflict. The Anglo-Boer Wars represented crucial precursors to modern South Africa's formation. While the First War, 1880-1881, ended in British defeat, the Second War, 1899-1902, demonstrated British determination to secure mineral resources regardless of cost. This brutal conflict introduced concentration camps, scorched earth tactics, and total war strategies to the African continent. British forces systematically destroyed Boer agricultural infrastructure, confined civilians in camps where thousands perished from disease and malnutrition, and gradually eliminated Boer resistance through attrition. The 1902 British victory established conditions for subsequent political arrangements while tragically marginalizing indigenous African populations, whose interests were subordinated to European colonial concerns. The South Africa Act of 1909 created the Union of South Africa on May 31, 1910, combining 4 colonies under British oversight while granting limited self-governance. This arrangement appeared to resolve immediate administrative challenges, but systematically excluded the indigenous African majority from political participation, establishing foundations for future institutionalized discrimination. South Africa achieved partial independence on December 11, 1931, though British monarchs remained heads of state. Complete independence arrived on May 31, 1961, when South Africa became a republic and severed formal British connections. However, independence for the white minority did not translate to freedom for the black majority. Instead, it enabled the implementation of apartheid's comprehensive racial. Beginning in 1948, the apartheid system represented one of modern history's most systematic examples of legalized racial discrimination. This framework regulated every aspect of life according to racial classification. Residence, employment, education, transportation, and personal relationships were all subject to racial restrictions. The white minority government established impoverished rural homelands, or Bantustans, where black South Africans were forced to reside while providing cheap labor for white-owned enterprises. This system created profound economic disparities while maintaining white political and economic control. Resistance emerged through organizations like the African National Congress, founded in 1912 to advocate for black South African rights. Initially pursuing peaceful protests and legal challenges, the movement's approach changed dramatically after the 1960 Sharperville massacre, where police killed 69 peaceful protesters, convincing many activists that non-violent methods alone were insufficient. Nelson Mandela emerged as the anti-apartheid struggle's most prominent leader, representing a transformation from legal advocate to revolutionary activist. Born in 1918 in the Eastern Cape, Mandela initially pursued legal challenges to apartheid through the courts before concluding that more direct action was necessary. His involvement in forming Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the ANC's armed wing, led to his arrest and the famous Rivonia trial of 1963 to 1964. During his trial, Mandela delivered one of the 20th century's most powerful speeches, declaring his willingness to die for democratic ideals. Sentenced to life imprisonment, he spent 27 years incarcerated, primarily on Robben Island, where he became an international symbol of resistance to racial oppression. His imprisonment galvanized global anti-apartheid movements and made him one of the world's most famous political prisoners. Throughout the 1980s, growing international pressure through comprehensive economic sanctions, cultural boycotts, and diplomatic isolation gradually weakened the apartheid regime. The divestment movement, particularly strong in the United States and Europe, pressured corporations and institutions to withdraw investments from South Africa. Sports boycotts isolated South African teams from international competition, while cultural sanctions prevented South African artists and performers from participating in global events. Internal resistance also intensified during this period. The 1976 Soweto uprising, triggered by mandatory instruction in Afrikaans, demonstrated the depth of black opposition to apartheid and resulted in international condemnation when police killed hundreds of student protesters. States of emergency declared in the 1980s failed to suppress resistance movements that had spread throughout the country. By the late 1980s, economic difficulties, internal resistance, and changing global dynamics following the Cold War's end made apartheid increasingly unsustainable. The Soviet Union's collapse removed the apartheid government as justification that it was defending the region against communist expansion, while the African National Congress could no longer be dismissed as a Soviet proxy. President F.W. de Klerk's decision to dismantle apartheid marked a remarkable turning point in world history. His February 1990 speech to Parliament announced the unbanning of political organizations, the release of political prisoners, and the suspension of capital punishment. Mandela's release on February 11, 1990, broadcast live to global audiences, initiated 4 years of intensive negotiations between former adversaries. The transition process required navigating complex challenges, designing constitutional frameworks that protected minority rights while ensuring majority rule, managing violence between different political factions, and addressing economic disparities created by decades of discrimination. The Convention for a Democratic South Africa, CODSA negotiations, involved multiple parties and civil society organizations in crafting a new political dispensation. This process culminated in South Africa's first democratic elections on April 26-29, 1994, now celebrated as Freedom Day, resulting in an ANC victory and Mandela's election as the country's first black president. The peaceful transition surprised international observers who had predicted civil war and established South Africa as a model for peaceful conflict resolution. Modern South Africa encompasses 1,221,037 square kilometers, making it the world's 25th largest country by area. Strategically positioned where the South Atlantic, Indian, and Southern Oceans converge, South Africa borders 6 nations: Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe. The country operates as a unitary parliamentary democracy with 3 capital cities: Pretoria, executive; Cape Town, legislative; and Bloemfontein, judicial. 9 provinces each maintain elected governments, with the African National Congress maintaining national governance and controlling 8 provinces since 1994. Economically, South Africa ranks as Africa's 3rd largest economy with a GDP of $419.9 billion, placing it 32nd globally. South Africa's 58.8 million inhabitants reflect remarkable diversity: 80.2% Black African, 8.8% colored, 8.4% white, and 2.5% Indian Asian. 11 official languages recognize this multicultural heritage, with Christianity practiced by 79% of the population alongside Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, and traditional African religions. This diversity earned South Africa the designation Rainbow Nation, though significant challenges persist. Apartheid's legacy continues influencing inequality, unemployment, and poverty levels. Infrastructure limitations, corruption, and skills shortages have constrained economic growth, while strong banking systems, economic diversity, and democratic institutions provide development foundations. South Africa's journey from human evolution's potential birthplace to modern democracy demonstrates remarkable transformation and resilience. The country's peaceful transition from apartheid to democracy proves that entrenched oppression systems can be dismantled through persistent struggle, international solidarity, and reconciliation. Today's South Africa embodies both modern challenges and possibilities. Rich natural resources, strategic location, and membership in organizations like BRICS and the G20 position the country for significant economic development. However, realizing this potential requires addressing historical inequalities while building inclusive prosperity for all citizens. The Rainbow Nation's story continues evolving, offering enduring lessons about human resilience, peaceful transformation, and hope's power in confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges. South Africa's experience remains profoundly relevant as the world grapples with questions of justice, reconciliation, and inclusive development in the 21st century. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe for more updates.